Start, right? Okay, good morning. Very warm welcome. Thanks for coming. Let's get started. Although we have few people, but I think the fewer it is, the better it is because it's going to be a group activity. So it's small. The group it's better. The outcomes, the learning outcomes would be better, right? So let me begin with my introduction, and then we'll have a round of introduction, and then we'll delve into the sort of the material. So my name is Apurv Kumar, and I'm the senior manager at Sambodhi Research and Communication, Noida. At Sambodhi, I work within the capacity building vertical, and I manage capacity building programs. I have over 10 years of work experience in social impact sector and public policy sector. Before joining Sambodhi, I have worked with two premier think tanks of India, which is Center for Policy Research, Delhi, and Takshashila Institution. At Takshashila, I was trained in this framework, this analysis framework, which I'll be talking about for the next 2 days. And I used to taught public policy at Takshashila. So all the experience, everything that I'm going to share with you will come from my sort of previous experiences as a policy analyst or a policy professional. Right. So this is going to be a 2-day workshop, and the best part is that I will be talking less, and you will be talking more because, as I said, that this is going to be a completely participative activity. What you're going to do is it's very exciting because for me, teaching policy analysis framework is very exciting because the participants will actually sort of delve into a policy problem. They will analyze a policy issue, and in 2 days, ideally it is done in 3 days, but we are going to do it in 2 days. In 2 days, you will find solutions to the policy problem, and you will zero in on one policy solution which is going to solve the problem, right? And I'm sure in your day-to-day activity, you will be sort of addressing some of these problems. You will be confronted with some of these problems. So this is a very structured way to find a solution to a public policy problem. Right? Let's begin with a round of introduction where you can introduce yourself, your name, your department, and what does public policy mean to you. I would like to start. Sure, sure, yeah. Just show of hands, how many of you are from economics background? A little bit of economics, graduation, post-graduation, you have. Anyone from public policy background? Law background? You're from which background, sir? Academic. Okay, science background. Good. Because this is because a few section of my material will delve into a little bit of economics, but I'll make sure that I will simplify and I will unpack the terms for all of you, right? To make things simple for all of you. So let's get started. This is what we are going. This is the ground that we are going to cover in the next 2 days, right? There will be first 30 to 45 minutes. I will be spending some time on the theory, setting up some theoretical foundation to public policy and public policy analysis, right? Because as you all of you know, but you have said that public policy is completely new to you, so that's going to help all of you to set the foundational sort of foundation for what public policy is. And what public policy analysis is, right? When we say public policy, the role of government, which is all of you, becomes integral. It is very critical and it is very significant. And we will delve into the role of government and some of the functions of the role and functions of the government. Then we'll straight away dive into public policy analysis. Now, this is a framework which was given by UC Berkeley professor Eugene Bardach. And Eugene Bardach, this framework is called Bardach's Eightfold Path, and you can see these 8 steps. So Eugene Bardach is a University of California Berkeley professor in public policy. And after 30 years of teaching policy to his students, he synthesized all his learnings into these 8 steps. And his main sort of argument is that to analyze a policy or to come up with a policy solution to a larger problem which is prevailing in society, if you follow these 8 steps, you will be able to crack the problem. You will be able to find the solution. So these are the steps that we are going to go through for the next 2 days, right? How is it going to pan out? So we have shared a case study with you, which you will find in your docket. It's the policy simulation exercise case study. And as I said that this is going to be a policy simulation exercise, which means that in next 2 days you will be actually working on a policy problem, right? Like a real case scenario. And probably by tomorrow evening you will come up with some solution, right? That's what we are hoping for. That's the objective of the 2-day workshop. Ideally, how I should have sort of, how I was thinking initially that after day one, there will be one group, one presentation, and day two, there will be final presentation where you will sort of, compile all these 8 steps and sort of come up, you share the policy solution to let's say Minister of Education, right? Since it's a smaller group, we'll see how it's going to pan out after maybe step 1 and step 2. Maybe after lunch, we'll take a call that how this thing is panning out. Probably we can have smaller sort of presentations after every 2 steps. That we will take a call maybe after step 1 and step number 2. Right? Let's begin with not so serious sort of stuff, because public policy at times can become like really serious, right? Just take a look closely at these 4 images. Take like 30 seconds and share with us what do you think. I mean, what comes to your mind when you see all these 4 images? Are there any commonalities? Protest. Sure. Protest for what? And what was the outcome? All 4 pictures, I mean, can be anything that sort of comes to your mind. It was 2012 protest in Delhi, which was the Nirbhaya case protest. Yes, absolutely right. Absolutely right. You're on the right track. Take a look at these 2 images. What do you think about these 2 images? Sure. Okay, let me give you some hints, right? There is a commonality between all 4 images, and the commonality is that laws were written, right? Laws were designed for all, laws and policies were designed for all 4 of them, right? So the first, if you remember in 2012, when there was this Delhi Nirbhaya case, this incident happened in December 2012. In January 2013, Justice Verma Committee was set up, and Justice Verma Committee gave recommendations to amend CRPCs and some of its provisions under sexual violence section. And this happened in a span of 2 to 3 months because there was so much of protest and outrage out there on the streets. The second one is 2011, if you recall, in Delhi, there was this massive India against corruption sort of campaign, and there was a lot of this anger against corruption. And again, law was sort of designed and was passed in 2011. This was a Lokpal and Lokayukt Act in Parliament, right? The difference between the act that was sort of Justice Verma Committee and Lokpal thing was, and it's very interesting, that the first one happened in the span of 2 to 3 months. The second one took at least 30 years to have a law. The first time Lokpal was passed in Parliament was 1968. It took 2011, after such a massive sort of outburst from the stakeholders, from the citizens, that the law was passed. This is from the ICDS. This is the success story of ICDS, which is the midday meal scheme and ICDS sort of scheme. And again, it's a flagship and it's a very old scheme, as all of you must be knowing. And Nature, it's a very prestigious publication. It came up with an evaluation study, and their mandate, the thing was, their result finding was that intergenerational nutrition benefits happened because of this massive feeding program, which is the world's largest feeding program, right? ICDS is world's largest feeding program. In 2021, Puri, which is in Odisha, this became the first city in India to have safe drinking tap water. Right? Probably it's one of the few cities in India which has this origin, which have this provision. What I'm trying to say is that there are commonalities in all four images, right? And all these four events spanned across 4 or 5 decades. But again, there are few commonalities. Commonalities are that there are multiple stakeholders with varied interest, right? In sort of first image, they were sort of the women, the girls, the people out there on the street. In the second image, it were the citizens who were actually quite sort of worried about the nature of current affairs and corruption. In sort of fourth image, in Puri's case, it was sort of it was the government who came up with this mandate, Naveen Patnaik government, that we should have sort of some sort of a policy which can actually provide citizens with safe drinking water. They don't have to use filter. They don't want they shouldn't be purchasing cans out there, right? So multiple stakeholders with varied interest. Role of government is integral because it's a government who will design policy, who will sort of come up with laws. They will actually notify rules, and it will be implemented. So role of government becomes extremely critical and important. And if you recall the last, the second, these two images, policy successes are actually possible, right? Most of sort of people, common people like us, we have this tendency of cribbing about that this is not working, that is not working. But there are few cases in which things are actually working, and we should take a note of it. We should draw some analogies, and maybe we should use it in our sort of day-to-day. We should learn from the best practices and apply in our day-to-day work. And finally, citizens' voices are incorporated. So these days, every law and every bill, there are proper sort of citizen consultation. You will see ads from the government or from the ministry in the newspapers, where they will ask citizens to add their inputs so that they can refine and fine tune some of the laws, right? So these are some of the commonalities. So what is public policy and why should we actually care about, right? So these two are the classic definitions of public policy, and some of you have actually mentioned some of one of these versions. That public policy is a set of decision which A, sets directives for immediate or future action or conduct, right? And B, it lays down guidelines for the implementation of action. So there are two parts. First part is that the government sets out directives for immediate action or a future course of action. And the second part is that it lays down guidelines for the implementation of these sort of strictures or the laws that they have sort of come up with. Let me give you a prime example. I'm sure you would have sort of read about national education policy, right? So if you go to page number 2 or 3, where they talk about the vision of national education policy, it says that the vision of national education policy 2020 is that they need to revision and revamp the infrastructure and the entire structure of education in India, right? So that's the vision that they have set, right? Which means that they are setting out directives for immediate or future course of action, right? And this is, so there are no sort of time limits to these things, right? They will sort of, the policy is a larger umbrella set of directives. Under policy there are schemes and programs. So through schemes and programs, the larger vision of a policy is vision is met, right? And the second part is actually it's laying down the guidelines for the implementation of that policy. Now, all said and done, things are there in the documents, are there in the vision documents, but how is it going to be implemented? Which departments, which ministries will implement? How will convergence happen? All those things, also some broad guidelines also come under public policy, right? So this definition was given by R.V. Vaidyanathan Iyer. He's a senior IAS officer, very esteemed IAS officer, and he's also an author of a very great book I would like to recommend if you are interested. It's called Policy Making in India. The second definition comes from Thomas Dye, who is a Florida State University professor in, I believe, political science. And he says that public policy is anything a government chooses to do or not to do. Now, this becomes completely paradoxical, right? The government chooses to do and not to do. This essentially means that there are few cases, there will be instances where government will intentionally take some steps, and there will be instances and few cases where government might not take not take few steps, right? So it's quite evident that, if there is a problem, let's say a malnutrition problem or a sanitation problem in the state or in the country, government will come up with some policy and some directives. But let's say if there is, and it's just a hypothetical example, let's say, there is a policy of providing, let's say, an egg in the midday meal scheme to the children, right? And there is a very conservative section of sort of group of people. They are pressurizing government not to include egg, right? And this has happened in some of the North Indian states, not to provide eggs in the midday meal scheme because they come from a very conservative and slightly orthodox section of the society. So it's the imperative of the government that the government can choose not to listen to them, because the wider goal is the overall benefit and the health of the children, right? So they can completely ignore their sort of advice, and they can go ahead with whatever they are trying to do, right? So it can choose to do or not to do. A primary agent, as I have been telling you, is in making policies government, because it's a government who can make authoritative decisions, right? And these are authoritative decisions that's going to impact lives of millions and millions of people. Uh, I want to just ask a question and help me distinguish between a general policy and a public policy. Let's assume I work in a hypothetical private company X, right? And tomorrow my HR comes up with this guideline that I have to wear kurta and pajama all 5 days, right? This is a dress code. Is this a public policy? Okay, and what's the difference between general policy and public policy? Sure. Same company. So people in the staff is applicable to the people in the staff, but not to larger people at large, right? Absolutely right. And this is the difference between public policy, and this is why it is important to study and know about public policy. One decision by government or by departments or by senior bureaucrats are going to impact lives of millions and millions of people, right? And maybe it's going to impact several generations. So that's why government's role is extremely critical. And I have already sort of covered this aspect, that fundamental choice is at the end of the day is with the government. It may choose to take a decision, it may choose not to take a decision, right? It may choose to take sort of, let's say, introduce few regulatory frameworks to curb, let's say, smoking. It may choose not to tax, let's say, in alcohol companies because they are getting a lot of revenue and taxes. So at the end of the day, it's the government's imperative to design these policies. Also keep in mind that government decisions and actions can have unintended consequences not related to policy. What is unintended consequence? Please try. Sure. Very right. So unintended intended consequences are those ramifications and those implications that government might not have thought about, but when sort of the policy was implemented, some unintended consequences happen that's going to negatively impact your policy. So you have to, I mean, a policy analyst as well as a government functionary should keep in mind what would be the unintended consequences. And prime example is alcohol ban in some of the North Indian states. So in Bihar and Gujarat, there are alcohol ban, but what is the unintended consequences? That there is a sprawling, black market of alcohol. And what's now happening is that the alcohol in some of the states are being sort of produced by using very spurious and illegal means, and it is causing deaths and other sort of health ramifications. So these are unintended consequences. So every time you take a decision or every time you are amidst a policy dilemma, just think about what would be the unintended consequences and how you can minimize unintended consequences, right? Just quickly, I'm sure that you'll be better positioned to talk what is government, but some sort of theoretical definition. And the first definition of the government was given by famous sociologist Max Weber in 1946, where he defined government as the legitimate as an entity that has the monopoly on the legitimate use of physical force within a given territory. Why legitimate? Because it's the citizens who elect government, right, through democratic process. That is why you are giving a legitimacy to the government of the day and to the decisions that the government is taking, right? Why physical force? Because the government has the authority to take taxes and give you benefits. Like you tax the citizen and provide roads, you tax the citizen and provide health and education and water, right? So it has a sort of monopoly on doing that. It can enforce law and order whenever law and order is sort of there's a law and order problem in the state, and it can create laws, right? So these are like three big pillars of what the government does. Other functions of government in a democratic setup could be developing and implementing policies, provisioning of basic services. So as I said, that there's a social contract between us, the citizens, and the government. We pay the taxes, and in return, we expect good roads, good toilets, and safe drinking water. So there's a sort of social contract between the citizen and the government. Ensure fairness in the society. So they have to come up with laws that can ensure that all sections of the society are provided goods and services equitably, right? And there is no difference in discrimination in the provision of services and the goods. And finally, it puts a check on regressive social norms, right? And so government can come up with policies, can come up laws that can actually address some of the societal problems that has percolated in our society. The fourth aspect, can you give a prime example that India as a country has a tool or an instrument that actually puts a check on regressive societal norms? You are very close. You are actually very close. It's the Constitution of India. The Constitution of India has laid out laws, provisions. It has articulated fundamental rights for the citizens, and it has come up with sort of provisions and laws that can actually put a check on the regressive societal norms in terms of caste, in terms of gender, in terms of class, so on and so forth. uh, the final 10 minutes, where do governments intervene, right? At what point government thinks that this is right to intervene, step up and design a policy for a policy problem, right? So there is a classic concept in economics, it's called market failures. So whenever there is a market failure, so what is market? Market is where there is a demand of some goods and services and there is a supply of goods and services. There are buyers of those goods and services or producers, and there are also sellers like the citizens or who are sort of buying those goods and services. Now, the ideal condition is that there is a demand and supply equilibrium. So there is a demand and there is supply. When they are met, there is an equilibrium. But it doesn't happen like that way, right? It's a very ideal situation. There will be some problem, and we all know what kind of problem happens. So someone will be maybe holding a good and increasing the price and giving you at, let's say, 2x. So that's a market failure, because you don't know that this person has the good, he has hoarded the good, and he's now selling you at 2x or 3x of the price. So that's a market failure. So the classic definition of market failure is whenever there are inefficiencies of distribution and provisioning of goods and services in a perfect market, that's market failure, right? There are several kinds of market failure, and please, at any point of time, if you think that things are getting little sort of difficult, please raise your hand and please interject me. Feel free to pause me or interject me, right? There are four kinds of market failures that we all see, that we have been seeing ever since the discipline of economics was discovered. One are the externalities. What are externalities? Externalities are the actions by which, so externalities are the situation in which someone else's action is going to impact me. So externality, external, I mean the root word is external, right? So someone else's external action is going to impact me. It can impact me positively, it can impact me negatively. So externalities are, so there are two types of externalities. First are positive externalities. What are positive externalities? So let's say that, my friend, my colleague Amartya, he has taken a vaccination for, let's say, an airborne disease which is there in this city. By him taking that vaccination, what he's actually preventing us getting infected by that disease, right? So this is positive externality. His action is impacting us, but in a positive way. The other example is sanitation. Let's say you're a municipal corporation. There are few areas in which there are this stagnant water problem and diseases, malaria, so on and so forth. And let's say they come up with proper drainage system. Again, it's going to have a positive impact to the citizen because you are lowering the disease outbreak, and you are actually ensuring that there's a healthy outcome of the society, of people living in that. So that's also an positive externality. What are negative externalities? Negative externalities, as I said, are the acts of someone which is going to negatively impact me. Let's say there is a fertilizer factory which is dumping all its effluent to the pond near to my colony or locality. This is going to impact me negatively, right? So these are negative externalities. Again, pollution is a prime example of negative externalities. So these positive externalities as well as negative externalities are part of our kind of market failure, right? So the second market failure is monopoly. When a firm or company monopolizes the production of goods and services, that's monopoly, right? So let's assume that in country there is only one company which is producing, let's say, laptops. What it is doing is it is actually killing the competition. It is actually killing the entrepreneurship. So because it's just one company who is getting all the support from the government, all the subsidy, it is developing and designing all the laptops, and other companies are just getting bankrupt. So that's monopoly. This is also a market failure, right? So, third one is information asymmetry, when one entity has more information than the other. Classic example is medical practice. In medical practice, the doctor has more knowledge and information than you as a patient, right? When you approach a doctor, the doctor knows more about you naturally, right? So the doctor can overprescribe medicine, can overprescribe tests to you, right? So that's an information asymmetry. He has more information, you have less information. So that is also market failure. Why? Because the probability is high that you are going to pay a lot more than what you are supposed to pay, right? So that's also market failure. The fourth one is public goods. And the public goods are the goods and services that are non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Let me explain these two terms. Non-excludable are those goods and services for which, even if I have not paid directly, but I am still getting the benefits of the goods and services. Example is defense. Let's say I don't pay direct taxes. So I'm not paying taxes, right? I'm not paying taxes which can go to, let's say, defense budgetary, right? But still I'm getting the benefits of national defense, right? It's not that they're selective, that non-taxable people, we shouldn't be protecting them. Another example is lighthouse. So lighthouse provide light to all the ships, even though you have paid taxes to the owner of the lighthouse or not, right? If you are coming to the harbor, you are getting benefit of the light that the guidance of the light that it is providing. So it is non-excludable. Why it is what does it the term non-rivalrous mean? That your consumption of the good is not going to reduce the quantity of the good, right? And it is not going to impact my consumption of the good. For example, public park. So if I'm visiting a public park and I'm using all the benefits of the public park, you can also benefit, right? If you're coming with your family, let's say next day or next week, you can also benefit, because It's non-rival risk. My consumption of that good is not impacting your consumption of good, right? So these are public goods. Public and prime example of public good is public health. Let's say vaccinations, sanitation facilities, all these are public goods, right? They are non-excludable, they are non-rival risks. Even if I'm not paying taxes, but direct taxes, but let's say CHC or PHC is available to me, right? Similarly, someone else who is going to that CHC doesn't mean that the medicines are not being provided to me, right? Or the pharmacist is not going to take care of me because that thing has been consumed. So public health is a prime good, prime example of public goods. Every public good, and I'm just closing this piece, every public good provision has a free rider problem. Why? Because I'm not paying the taxes, but still I'm consuming the goods and services, as I've mentioned, in defense, right? So there are no incentives for a private sector player to provide public goods. Why? Because there is a free rider problem. Private sector would try and maximize its benefits, right? So if, let's say, 3 people out of 7 people in the room are not paying taxes, the private person will say that, hey, I'm not going to provide, let's say, public health to this room. But government will say that, hey, these are my citizens and it is my obligation because these are public goods, so the government will provide the public goods. So these are 4 cases in which governments intervene. All are market failures, externalities, monopoly, information asymmetry, and public goods. Right? Just think about it. Maybe after the workshop, just read up a bit more, and maybe when next time you are dealing with a policy document, just think about: is there a market failure problem somewhere? Am I dealing with a market failure? What is a market failure? Once that understanding develops, a lot of clarity will come up by within yourself. So these are like classic market failure which I have just spoken about, and these are the actions and activities through which government intervenes. So I said negative externalities. Whenever there are pollution or someone is dumping effluent to your pond, the government can come up with laws. They can tax the company. They can come up with regulation. Positive externalities, they can. When I said about spoke about vaccination. So what happened during COVID? Government subsidized Serum Institute, right? Because that's what the government do. It's a positive externalities. It's going to address the COVID-19 situation. So they went ahead and they subsidized the private company. So they will finance and subsidize. That's the government intervention. Monopoly, they will break the monopolies, and you would have heard that in US they come up with antitrust laws whenever there are tech companies that become like really big, right? So so that's how monopolies are breaking, and they also cap some prices. They do some price capping. How do they address information asymmetry? Again, through regulation and taxes. If you would sort of recall, few years ago, Bangalore and I think Rajasthan recently, I'm not sure about the status of the law, but a few years ago, Bangalore came up with a law, and it was heavily, of course, contested by the doctors. They came up with law to regulate doctors and doctor associations, right? So they have to be very clear and transparent with as per the law, they were supposed to be extremely transparent to the patients, how and what medicines they are prescribing. Of course, there was a lot of protest and struggle from the doctors, so it was just put in the cold burner. Finally, the public goods, it's the public provisioning, as I said, that vaccination, public health, it's the imperative of the government to provide public goods to its citizens. So that's how classically governments intervene. And that's how these are the ways by which government also design their policies. Right? Now, every public policy goes through a life cycle. It goes through several steps. Every policy, right from its ideation up till its implementation, evaluation, and final results, it goes through a policy life cycle. And this image actually depicts the policy life cycle. So first step is agenda setting. As I said, that if you can recall those images, right? So they were protest, or there will be some issue through which some sort of an agenda setting will happen. So this agenda setting process will set the foundation of ideation and coming up with policies and laws. So the first step is agenda setting. The second step is policy formulation. where you actually come up with specific policy measures that's going to address the problem. Third is decision making, where the government and legislative or the executive of a wing of the government will come, and they will sort of will come up with a decision as to how the policies will be implemented, who is going to implement, and how is it going to be financed. So all those decisions are being made at decision making. Third step is policy implementation. It is when actual implementation happens. So first three steps, you have the agenda with you have designed the policy. Now is the implementation part. The actual implementation is the fourth step. Final, once the implementation has happened, then policy evaluation happens to evaluate whether the policy was a success or a failure. And if it's not going in the right direction, can the department or the ministry take course correction to to bring it to the right track? So that's where evaluation happens. And then when the and then the cycle goes on and on and on. So the course correction will happen, then agenda will shift a bit more, and then some decisions will be changed, and then the cycle will go on and on. So these are five classic steps for a policy. So this is complete policy life cycle. The policy analysis bit is going to cover just two more slides and then we can break for just two more slides and we can break for tea. The policy analysis, which is going to be which is what we are going to cover in next 2 days, broadly covers policy formulation, little bit of decision making, but 80% I would say policy formulation. Decision making, some bits and aspects as to how is it, not too much of detail of how is it going to be implemented, but what departments and what administrative challenges we should be addressing while designing these policies. So policy analysis bit will going to covers only these two steps. Policy implementation and policy evaluation are completely different I will need another 2 days to go through policy implementation, policy evaluation, right? I'll quickly cover this agenda setting aspect and then we can break for tea. How does agenda happen, right? And this is a beautiful framework which was given by another public policy scholar called Kingdon, Kingdon. And this is called Kingdon schema, right? This framework. And what essentially this framework does, it says that how do we, at what point a policy issue or a public problem becomes a government agenda, right? So there has to be 2, 3 or 4 broad conditions that should be met. First is there should be a problem stream, which means that there should be a problem. There should be a problem in the society which needs to be resolved as soon as possible because it's a ticking time bomb, right? So there's a problem stream. Second is there is a policy stream. So people like all of us sitting in this room as policy analysts will come up with some policy solutions, with some policy idea, with some ideas that can actually resolve that problem. So that's the policy stream. The third stream is politics stream, in which the government of the day is also aligned that, hey, this is a problem. Hey, we also have some solutions from some sections of the society. So let's go ahead and see whether it becomes a part of agenda or not. So when all these 3 streams align together, which is problem, you have a problem, you also have a policy solution, a probable solution, potential solution, and third, you also have a political alignment, then something called policy window that opens up, right? So there's a policy window that opens up, and through this, whenever this policy window opens, there will be a policy. I mean, he has used the term policy entrepreneur, but it could be any bureaucrat. It could be a visionary bureaucrat. It could be a visionary civil society organization that can actually advocate this policy, this problem, the solution of the problem, and it will become part of the agenda. So if you recall, in the case of the CRPC and Justice Verma Committee, there was a problem stream because there were massive protests, and this is something very bad that happened to that girl in December 2012. There was a policy stream. We already had CRPC, but they were outdated, so you need to rectify some of those parts. There were politics stream because the government was under a huge pressure. So all these 3 aligned. And then you have people like, let's say, Justice Verma, and this Justice Leela Seth, Justice Verma, and other lawyers and other sort of activists and journalists who sort of pushed all this and helped government to make this as its key agenda. And that's why in 2 or 3 months you saw the law taking its shape. So this is when agenda setting happens, right? Probably whenever there's the society is confronted with a massive policy problem. Right? Any questions so far? Happy to take. Sorry? Policy entrepreneur is someone, as I said, as a visionary individual. It could be a bureaucrat, it could be a group, or it could be an organization, it could be a group of individuals who will use these alignment to its benefit to make sure that this problem becomes part of the government agenda. Right? And most of the time, this policy entrepreneur is outside of the system. Right? Most of the time they are outside of the system. In some cases, they could be part of the system. So a very senior bureaucrat can sort of come up with. I'm not sure if I can't recall the name, but in Karnataka there was a very senior bureaucrat, and what he did was it's quite funny and interesting that to address absenteeism problem in PHCs and CHCs, what he did was that, and now it has become common, but way back in early 2000 and mid 2000, he came up with this idea that, hey, why don't we have biometric system in PHC, right? So that we set up an accountability sort of. So this person is a policy entrepreneur. So he uses the sort of problem thing. If there was a policy solution, and someone higher up in the political sort of setup is also aligning with the bureaucrat. So when all these three things align, policy entrepreneur will also pitch in and policy window will open, and then it will become part of the government agenda. Right? Any other question?
So it's compulsory for the three streams to align in order to get that policy government agenda.
It's not completely, it's not a mandatory thing. So it could be just a politics and policy stream, and maybe there's no problem. So for example, demonetization, right? Was there a problem? I don't think so, right? There wasn't this problem that, hey, there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of black money. But maybe some policy analysts and a little bit of politics aligned together, and that window opened up. Right? It's a completely sort of a different discussion, but that's a good example, and that's absolutely a brilliant question, because many people do confuse that. Is this a mandatory sort of condition that all three things should align? It's not. Okay, we'll do a quick recap. So probably in like just 2 minutes. So we just talked about what public policy is. We also identified that the role of government is very integral and very significant in public policy because of obvious reason. And we also sort of learned about market failures. And market failures is when governments intervene, right? And there are 4 types of market failures. And essentially, whenever these 4 market failures happen, it is the government's imperative to intervene. And while I was closing that bit, I said that just go back and revisit some of the policies that you have worked on or you are working on, or the documents or the reports that you are working on for the government, and you will identify a clear market failure somewhere down the line, right? That's how things work. And in the last sort of slide, we spoke about kingdom schema. It's when the policy stream, problem stream, policy stream, and politics stream intermatch, and there is a policy entrepreneur. It's then when the policy window opens, and then that policy issue becomes part of the government agenda, right? Now we'll dive straight into the policy analysis, which is going to be our activity, right? So what policy analysis is? Policy analysis, I mean, I have sort of come up with these sort of fancy definition, but if I have to describe policy analysis in one sentence, it is this. Policy analysis is nothing but a framework or an approach to solve a problem. That's it. It's as simple as that. You have identified a policy problem, you have a policy problem. Now there is a systematic step-by-step approach to find the solution of the problem. It's this process which is policy analysis. It's nothing very complicated, right? Uh, so the classic definition of policy analysis is, as I have mentioned, is the process of identifying potential policy options that could address the policy problem, and then comparing these options to choose the most effective, efficient, and feasible one. Right? Let me show how it works. So, can all of you see the whiteboard? Right? So let's assume that there is a policy problem one, right? And this is a pressing problem in your state or in your city, and I'm sure that to solve this problem there will be multiple options. There couldn't be one option, right? It's not possible that there's only just one option. There'll be several options to solve this problem, right? So there will be policy option number one, there will be policy option number two, there will be policy option number three, right? And all these policy options will have the capability to solve this problem, right? Maybe you have come up with this one, maybe someone else has come up with this one, someone else has come up with this one. But all of this will lead to solving this problem, right? This is what policy analysis is. There is a policy problem, you have alternative solutions, then you do some sort of an analytical and evaluative thinking to zero in or to identify that one solution which is finally going to solve the problem. So by sort of all these steps will help you identify that one solution which is going to solve the problem. Not all solutions might solve the problem. Maybe this plus this will be able to solve the problem. Maybe this plus this will be able to solve the problem, right? So it is this thinking which is policy analysis. Okay. And this is what the definition given by CDC of the United States, of the US, right? So it's a process of identifying policy options that could address the policy problem and then compare these options to choose the most effective, efficient, and feasible one. So there are options. You have to take a call. You have to be judgmental. You have to take decision that which one of these policy option is efficient, is effective, feasible, and within budget ranges to solve the problem. That's it. That's policy analysis. Now there are 8 steps to do this, and that's what we are going to do. The importance of policy analysis is that it has gone through a systematic process to choose the policy option that may be the best solution to a given policy problem, right? So as a policy analyst, you have to find the best solution that's going to solve the problem, and this is where the importance and significance of policy analysis as an activity or as an exercise depends upon, right? Policy analysis is not personal decision making, and this is extremely important. Every individual, we will have our own biases, we will have our own pet solutions to solve a problem, right? Let's say there is a problem of, let's say, students not going to school. Maybe as a policy analyst, my pet solution is to give direct cash to the mother. I'm just assuming, right? Maybe if you incentivize mothers and provide them cash, and tell them that hey, your child should not drop till class 10th, right? I will provide you cash, but your child should not drop till class 10th. So what you are doing, you are incentivizing the mother to send the child to till class 10th, right? So this could be my pet policy solution, and I am like completely invested into this, right? Maybe this is not the best solution, right? Maybe the problem is something else. Maybe the problem is far more complicated than I'm thinking, right? So again, these 8 steps will help you remove that bias, will help you remove that prejudice, and come up with a very analytical solution to solve the problem. It's not a personal decision making, because as I've said that it concerns the lives and well-being of large number of people. It removes the biases and prejudices, and for every public policy analysis exercise, the consumer or the target audience will be your client. Now your client could be your higher officers, could be your department heads, it could be a politician, it could be a chief secretary. So these are clients. or it could be diverse, a group of stakeholders as well, right? Because nowadays in policy problem, and you would sort of be knowing it better, that government is involving many other stakeholders, right? Civil society organization, consultancy firms, experts, lateral entry experts, so on and so forth, right? So these are diverse group of stakeholders which will also be interested to listen to your policy solution, right? So they are your clients. So this is a classic Bardach's eightfold path of policy analysis. All these 8 steps are interlinked to each other. None of them, it's not that, hey, can I miss this one and straight away jump to that one. It's not going to happen. So this is a very systematic 8 steps, from step number 1 to step number 8. Step number 1, you will define the problem. Step number 8 is when you will give policy recommendation. And the steps in between is when you will come up with policy options and decide which one of the best policy option is going to solve the problem. So these are the 8 steps. The first 3 steps, which is define the problem, assemble more evidence, and construct alternatives, these steps are also called as analytical steps. Why? Because here you will be doing analytical thinking. You will be doing some sort of analysis, some kind of you will be doing a little bit of research, by the way. I hope your phones are in good shape, because you will be doing some secondary research. So you will be doing some secondary literature research. You will be taking some decision based on the evidence which is available in public domain. So that's why these first 3 steps are called analytical steps. Step number 4 and step number 6 are called evaluative steps. These are different from analytical steps, because here you get the freedom to make some value judgments. They are not hardcore analytical. I mean, your research and everything has been done. That's good. But here you need to make some assumptions based on your value judgment. What value it is that drives you to take that decision? And I'll come to that, but I'll just give you a small example. Maybe when it comes to solving a problem which is given in the case study, it's about education. Maybe your value judgment as a policy analyst or as a group is that it should be equitable, that it should reach out to people who are from all sections of society, people who are from far-flung areas. So it should be equitable. It should be accessible to every child of the state, right? That could be your value system that drives you. Maybe it's not, and your value system, the other value system that could drive you should be efficiency. That, hey, if I have, let's say, 50,000 crore, or let's 5,000 crore as a budget for education, within this stipulated budget, I have to come up with concrete outcomes, right? And maybe or maybe not, equity will take a back seat, right? Because you have this limited budget under which you need to sort of provide education or provide schooling to these children. Then equity might take a back seat, right? Then it's the efficiency which will take the front seat. It could also be another sort of assumption could be whether this is feasible in the present administrative sort of setup. Whether you have adequate amount number of manpower, do you have adequate number of subject matter expertise, right? To implement some of these solutions. So all these things you need to make some sort of a value judgment, and this will happen in 4, 5, and 6 steps. The last 2 steps are very easy. They are like breeze. So these are like when so they will they will be policy options, and in step number 7 you will decide which one of the policy options is going to solve the problem. And finally, you have to tell the story, which means it will be the final presentation. So on day 2, you will be sort of giving us a final presentation of what your policy solution is, and you have to back your solution with proper data, with proper nuances, with proper sort of arguments. So that's how it's going to pan up in next 2 days. Just a quick sort of a thing that, as I said, that Bardach's eightfold path, this policy analysis is a process of solving problem. And it includes, as I said, policy options and zeroing in on one alternative which is going to solve the problem. Right? I might repeat this again and again. Why? Because just want to sort of ingrain that there will be several options and 1 or 2 options is going to solve the problem. You might have to remove some of the options, right? And that's what as a group you need to do. Policy analysis is an art as well as science. Why? Because I said that you will do some sort of a scientific sort of thing in first three steps, and then it's called art because then you have to make some value judgment in few steps, right? So it's both an art and science. It's not that you have to apply complete a mathematical or scientific analytical framework. At times you have to sort of depend on your value judgment also. So that's the balance that you need to strike between these two frames of mind. Also, one thing which is extremely sort of important, maybe in a small setup, in a workshop way, it might not appear. But when you are actually applying this framework into your, let's say, a problem or in your day-to-day activity, you will see that it's a iterative process, which means that you will keep on redefining the problem because you will first define the problem and then you will do some research. Through some research, you will realize that hey, my problem is not very fine tuned. It is still very vague. I need to sort of scope. I need to limit the scope of the problem so that it becomes like really sharp problem for me to come up with solution. So again, you will go and you will redefine the problem. You will fine tune the problem. So that's why it's called iterative process. You will keep on few initial steps. You will keep on revisiting, and you might be doing changes, which is completely fine. It is completely fine to change some of the problems and some of the alternatives. But what is not fine is completely altering your problem, and which means that there's some problem in identifying your problem. So it's an iterative process. The second aspect is that the final output, the final product which is expected from you is final sort of policy solution, and just treat it as a meeting in let's say Ministry of Education, in which you have to in like 10 to 15 minutes you need to pitch your policy option to a minister or to a very senior IS officer, right? So that's what policy analysis is, and that's what we are going to do in next 2 days. So since this is going, there are like just 5 people, so we'll have just one group. Ideally, it is done in 2 or 3 separate groups. But what we are going to do is that we are going to make just one group, right? And this is how it's going to work. So for every step number 1 till step number 8, I will take like 15 minutes to brief you about the step, right? What the step is and what is expected. Now, all 5 of us, there are flip charts. All 5 of us, you have to work using the flip charts on that step. And after every step, you have to present whatever you have come up with, right? So that's how it's going to be, right? And I'm glad that's a small sort of a group, and it's going to help me also to give you sort of very specific feedback also and comments on you. So step number 1, I'll brief you for 15 minutes. I'll share the flip chart and I will give you, let's say, 30 minutes, and after 30 minutes there will be a short presentation in which you have to help me articulate your problem definition. Okay, good. Now, step number 1. Okay, before that, extremely important step which I have completely forgotten. We have shared with you this case study, right? It's exactly 12. Just spend 15 minutes reading this case study, right? And at 12:15, I will start the briefing session. That what you need to do.
That we find a possible solution to deal with the dropouts and also the infrastructure of the education system in the state.
Sure. Great, great. Is this something which you have found really interesting, and I'll come back to it? It's understood, right? It's clear? Understood? Any problem, any doubts? Clear, right? So basically, this case study is just a scenario, right? It has painted a picture about a problem which is there in Meghalaya, right? It has not given any solution, of course, right? Because that's what we are going to do. It is just a scenario, but has this case study helped you identify a very specific problem which is happening in landscape of education, in case of education in Meghalaya? Actually, you have solved most of my problem. Yeah, that's really a very good sort of reading. Really appreciate that. Um, but we'll park it there because we have already jumped to, let's say, one of those 5 or 6 steps, right? Um, what you need to do is that this is a scenario which is being articulated in the case study. Now, as step number one, you need to very sharply define the problem. What exactly is the problem? Right? The problem couldn't be, this is not the problem, right? The problem is something very specific, something very crisper, something very, which is sharper, right? In 1 or 2 lines, you need to define the problem. What problem this case study tells you. And that is precisely what step number one is. Step number one gives you the reason for doing the policy analysis. That, hey, this is my case study. From my case study, this is the problem that I have identified, and this is what I'm going to solve in next sort of for across 2 days. So it gives you the reason to do policy analysis. It also provides a sense of direction to the evidence gathering, which is step number two, and I'll come to it later on. It provides a sense of direction. It gives you motivation to support your problem definition with exact data. That some of the data is there. I have deliberately not put lot of data in the case study because that's the part of step number two. Some of the data is there, and Kenneth has very rightly pointed it out, but some of it you need to find out as part of step number two. Why? Because you need to support your problem definition. The problem definition can't be your gut feeling, can't be an intuitive feeling that, hey, this is my intuition, this is my gut feeling, that is why it is a problem. It has to be supported with data, right? With evidence. And the way you define the problem is going to define how, is going to sort of determine how you are going to construct the alternatives, how you are going to select the criteria, project the outcomes, so on and so forth. This step becomes extremely important. If you somehow falter at this step, then the whole analysis gets impacted, right? But the best part is even if there are few sort of let's say incomplete pieces in step number one, when you're doing step number two, you will clear you can of course go back and redefine your problem. You can fine tune your problem. You can sort of make some tweaks to your problem, right? But step number one is something like extremely important. It lays out the foundation of the building. That foundation has to be extremely strong, right? um, your problem definition should sort of articulate why is it a problem, right? From this case study, if you give this case study to someone else, that they will say that, hey, okay, of course education is a problem, there may be infrastructure issues, there may be dropouts, but hey, grand enrollment ratio is also very good. In some cases, Meghalaya is actually doing above national average. You need to convince, but still, if you see, the third paragraph says that Meghalaya ranked 20th among all states in SDG 4, which means that completely something is missing, right? Which we are not able to articulate, which we are not able to highlight. So that is what problem definition will do. Problem definition using the data, using the evidence. You need to define the problem in a way so that the person, the client, or the stakeholder gets convinced that this is actually a problem that needs government's attention, that warranties a policy, intervention, government intervention, right? And again, I'm broadly, just as I said, that just be cautious about market failure lens, right? So just you don't have to put it in your slides or somewhere, but just be aware that is it a public good, is it an information asymmetry problem, is it monopoly, what is it, right? Just be cautious about the fact that what market failure is sort of leading to this kind of a problem, right? And why it needs government intervention. So just be aware of market failure. Um, when you are sort of defining the problem, so there are some statistics here. There will be some statistics which you will do as part of step number two. So when you are defining the problem, you need to quantify it, right? In a sense that it should appear as a problem. Your problem definition can't be that your problem definition can't be the first line of third paragraph that Meghalaya ranked 20th among all states in SDG 4. That can't be your problem definition. Your problem definition, and I'm giving you an example. Your problem definition could be that the state of the learning outcomes of state of Meghalaya as compared to other state has decreased from X to Y. I'm just giving, I'm not an education expert, I'm just giving you an example, right? That's your problem definition. You need to quantify it. You need to make me believe that this actually is a big problem, right? So you need to quantify using data, using evidence. Gather more information to help you calibrate magnitudes, which is what you are going to do in step number 2. And in many cases, you will find some data, you might not find some data. So at times when you're not finding some data, you need to do some sort of a guesstimate also, that maybe some other state has had the same problem and it has been able to reduce, increase the learning outcomes by, let's say, X%, right? So that could be a part of your problem definition. So you are free to make some guesstimate, because as I said, public policy is something of a future, right? You don't know what's going to happen, right? You can't predict, but of course you can make some guesstimate. So when you don't have a position of data, you can make some guesstimate, you can extrapolate something, right? That so and so thing happened from, let's say, 99 to 2010, and after that you don't have data. Maybe if you do the same thing from 2011 onwards, it may drop by so and so percentage. I'm just giving an example. So you are free to make some guesstimate, but quantify your and use as much your data as part of the homework. You don't have to put too much of data in the problem definition. The problem definition should have only 1 or 2 pieces of data that should help me convince that this is a problem, right? Be as precise as problem when you're defining the problem. So in 2 statements, in 2 sentences, you need to define the problem, which is there hidden somewhere in this case study, right? So just be very precise, very short sentences. You need to sort of define what the problem is. Narrow down the scope of research, by geography or different aspects of the problem. Maybe, as you said, that maybe infrastructure is a problem. So just sort of just focus on that. And because if you start focusing on 7 or 8 things, then the focus will dilute, right? So you need to keep your focus really sharp when you're defining the problem. Think in terms of degrees and not in absolutes, which essentially means that when you are sort of defining the data problem, and I said that hypothetically, let's say that so and so thing decreased from X% to Y%. So you need to give the magnitudes, right? You need to give in degrees, which is percentage, and not absolute. Absolute will be 1,07,000 something to 80,000. You don't have to give me precise numbers. You need to give me in percentages, right? Problem definition should be in percentages, because that's how anyone will understand that the malnourishment increase from 12% to 15%. If you say malnourishment increase from 5,06,000 something to 7 lakh something, it won't make sense to me, right? Cognitively, it will be difficult for me to make sense of that number, right? So just think in degrees and not in absolutes. Um, your problem, your policy solution and direction of research will depend on the problem definition. So just be very careful that it should be backed with data, it should be precise, and it should be sort of very sharp, so that you are able to solve that one problem which you intend to solve, right? And ideal, as I said, it should be precise. It should be captured in just 1 or 2 sentences and not more than that. There are 3 pitfalls that you need to be really careful when you are defining the problem, and these are like common pitfalls that participants generally do. So I have just sort of highlighted here. Defining the solution into the problem. This is a major problem in many of the problem definition. So I want you to be extremely cautious that when you are defining the problem, restrict yourself only to the problem definition and don't go into the solutioning part. It would be very tempting, as he said, that infrastructure is a problem. But what you are doing is you are actually adding a solution to your problem, which might restrict your thinking and imagination, right? There could be other options also, which you might sort of which you will discover in step number 3 or step number 4, right? So don't put solution in the problem. Don't say that there's a high dropout of children because of infrastructure, because of so and so reason, right? So just stay away from solutioning part in step number 1. Step number 1, only the problem. That's it. Accepting to also when you are sort of doing some basic research, which after next 10 to 15 minutes, just see that there will be some literature, there will be somewhere some material or article which will sort of help you identify the causal claims in the problem definition, which essentially means that what are the causes of the problem and what are the implications of the problem, right? So just be aware of that, because it will become extremely important for you to articulate a problem definition, and also it will help you sort of present the problem definition to someone and try and convince that person that hey, this is a problem, because if there are dropouts, it means that the learning outcomes are inadequate, which means that the child at its adult when he reach or she reaches his or her adulthood, the average income will be really less than an average individual in other state, right? So this is a causal claim. So you are making me sit back and take note of your policy problem, right? That hey, this is absolutely a major problem. It should be solved as soon as possible, right? And as I said, it will be iterative, so don't make a very rigid problem definition. Use one or two data points in two sentences, that's it. Because chances are high that you might have to fine tune or may not be, but you need to fine tune some of your problem definition, maybe next consecutive steps, right? um, so that's, is it clear? Is this your activity? Is this clear to you that what you need to do? How you are going to define the problem, right? This is a case study. This is just a scenario. Now from the scenario, you have to extract the problem and make me believe that hey, this is really a problem, right? So that's step number one. I'll quickly cover step number two, and then we will go to the activity part, which you will be doing this. So step number two is assembling the evidence, right? So you will be doing some sort of a secondary data literature review. You will be going through maybe some data, publicly available data, administrative data for Meghalaya state and maybe other states if you're comparing or doing some analysis, right? So most of the time in your policy analysis exercise will go in thinking, two aspects, in thinking and looking for evidence. That's, these are like two pillars of the policy analysis thing, right? And hustling for data or finding data is actually a time consuming thing, and you would agree with me, right, that it's quite a time consuming thing, because at times data is actually scattered, at times data is actually not available. There are times when data are quite dated also, right? So you need to find out recent data to sort of back up your claims, right? And you would be confronting this problem every now and then. So it's a time consuming activity. So that's what you are supposed to do in step number two. You need to assemble evidence to support your problem definition. That's the first mandate. This step is actually going to support step number one, which is fine tuning your problem definition, right? So you will gather some data and you will define and fine tune the problem. But the second mandate is that assembling more evidence will will go across these six steps, these next four steps up till step number six. So you will be assembling evidence in step number three also. You will be doing some evidence gathering for step number four. You will be doing some evidence gathering for step number five and probably step number six, right? So this step cuts across these steps, right? So just be careful, and every time I will brief, I will say that do research for constructing alternatives, which means you are doing nothing but you are assembling the evidence. When I will say select the criteria and project the outcomes, I will again ask you to do the research, which is nothing but you are going and assembling more evidence, right? So this will support this, as well as it will cut across these next four steps, right? So this becomes an extremely important sort of practice as well as a step. The motivation to do assemble more evidence with respect to step number one is to make the audience realize and be persuaded that this actually is a problem, right? As I said, that it can't be your gut feeling, it can't be on basis on your intuition. You have to convince someone to your higher ups that hey, this is the evidence, and that is that this is a problem, right? And that is how the person will be convinced. So That's why it is a motivation to your problem definition. Um, Another extremely important sort of tip, if you will, is that please so when you are doing research, and you'll be doing research for like 30, I'll give you 30 to 40 minutes probably. When you are going to do research, just be very economical about your research, right? Don't go into what is called as rabbit's hole, right? Just hold back and see whether this piece of data is important for your problem definition or not. If it is not, then get rid of it, right? So you need to be extremely smart, because there is absolutely no limit to data or evidence gathering, right? You can take days and days and days, and you can collect as many data as possible, right? So you have to limit yourself. You need to give scope to your evidence gathering as well, because otherwise it will become a big sort of exercise, and you will fall into the trap, and you won't be able to fine tune your problem definition. So try and collect only that data that can be converted into evidence from your problem definition. Just be very choosy about your data, right? And so that's extremely important, that you should keep in mind. And finally, the three principal purposes, and I have already covered this, three principal purposes that evidence gathering will serve is: assess the nature and extent of the problem. So it is because of due to the data, you'll be able to assess the nature and extent of the problem. Assess and identify possible policy alternatives and solutions. So these 6 steps is what assemble your this step number 2 will support these steps as well, right? So it will support this step as well as these 4 steps. And finally, identifying policies that have been thought by others solving similar problems. So somewhere in step 3, when I will ask you to come up with policy options, they chances are high that one of those policy options could be one of the options that someone else is doing. Maybe some other state is doing, maybe some other country, South American country, or maybe South Asian country, which is doing, which has a very similar demographic or political setup like us, right? You're free to choose that, but you need to customize some of those things, right? You can't draw everything that Singapore is doing and say that, hey, let's implement here, because that's not going to be possible. So you need to customize. You need to be aware of the realities of the administrative setup in the state, right? So you free feel to use case studies, best practices from somewhere else, and try and see that whether some of these options are solving the problem, right? But just be careful about the administrative and the feasibility of some of those solutions. Here are a few tips for assembling the evidence, right? So think before you collect. Be an efficient collector of data. So be very economical and be very choosy what data you are covering, right? Keep thinking about what you do and you don't need. So as I said, that just keep the data that you want and get rid of data that you don't want for your evidence, for your problem definition. Avoid spending too much time collecting data that have little or no potential to be developed into evidence. So the data which is not going into a problem definition or a evidence gathering in any of the step, just get rid of it, because it will just complicate your problem. Value of any piece of evidence depends on these factors. So just be sort of watchful of these factors, that the likelihood that it will help you substitute a better decision for the one you would have made without it. So if the evidence or the data that you have captured, if it is helping you make better decisions, then keep that data. If not, then get rid of that data. Okay. The likelihood that a substituted decision will produce a better policy outcome. Whether the data you have collected is contributing to a better policy outcome or a better problem definition, keep that data, value that data. The other piece of data you can sort of junk it. And the final factor will be the magnitude of difference in value between the improved outcome and original outcome. Because you will see later on in the hindsight, once you complete 8 steps, you will see that the data that you have captured and the data that you have sort of got rid of, the ones that you have captured help you identify the problem and do all these 6 steps efficiently. Had you used the data which you have junked, it might would have delayed your delayed your process, or it might would have derailed your thought process also, right? So just be very careful when choosing the data, because the temptation is to use as much data as possible to cushion your your case, but that's not going to solve your problem. Review the literature. As I said, that hardly exists a problem on whose causes and solutions is not being researched somewhere. So I mean, internet is something that has democratized this process, so use that generously. Use journal articles, administrative data, public data which is available in public domain, or case studies to gather evidence. Survey best practices. As I said, that someone else would have done solved this problem much before us, right? So just take a look at what solutions they have proposed. Maybe some of the solutions are very novel solutions, and that can actually help us solve our problem. So survey the best practices and study analogies and try and see how it fits into your problem definition and solution, right? So try and translate some of those best practices into your policy alternatives and see how it fits into your scheme of things, right? Is this clear? Step number one and step number two. So you need to define the problem. You have read the case study. You need to define a problem in 2 sentences, and you need to support that problem with data. Any questions? Any doubts? If not, shall we move to the activity? So if you two can come here together, that would be super useful. If probably you can shift the chair, a table. Just join the table and make this combined thingy. So what I need is problem definition, and the problem definition in, let's say, 2 sentences. Problem definition should have 1 or 2 pieces of data which will support the problem definition. That's it, problem definition, and some pointers on the evidence that you have gathered in the process, right? Just the evidence that according to so and so data, we found that this and this happened according to so and so data. So I just want to see what data you have captured, what data you have surveyed. Use your internet. That's a Wi-Fi password. You might need it, right? So case study, synthesize the case study into the problem definition for me. And it's 12:30. Let's see if we can finish this by 1. Yeah. I'm here if you have any problem, any doubts, I'm happy to. Probably the best way will be if one of you can actually highlight some of the key things from the case study that helps you synthesize your problem definition, right? And then discuss and try and see if you can club it into 1 or 2, if problem definition is emerging from that sort of thing, right?